directed. Score! Game 7! Martin St. Louis! We are going back to Tampa Bay! A Cavalier spinning. A Cavalier looking. Trying to drop it off. Brings it in himself. Left it in the middle. Shot! Score!
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Thunderstruck with your host, Philip Wunderlich, co-host Jake Ricker, and Michael Wax. That's right, this time I did not mess up on the names, guys. We have a lot to talk about today. But first, I want to check in with you guys, see how you guys are doing. So how are you doing, Jake?
I'm doing good. I'm hanging in there, just waiting for some hockey to start. So I'm ready to sit at my couch and waste a full day watching hockey.
That was a good plan. And Mike, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm good. With sports coming back, baseball's coming back next Friday, and hockey's coming back a couple days after that. So besides summer college classes, it's a really good way to pass the time.
We're going to start in with the return to play. The hotels were announced where they're going to be staying at. And I know, Mike, you were talking about in the chat kind of that you were kind of upset by it.
I don't understand why we need to know where these players are staying because, number one, a lot of people are in quarantine already, so it shouldn't make a huge difference. And for the players, they don't want to talk to as many people as possible. They want to stay around the team. They don't want to have any incidents with fans, with possibly contracting the coronavirus from a fan. So it's probably nothing, but at the same time, I just didn't feel like it was necessary for people to report, hey, these are where these players are staying at, because that's sort of privacy.
Yeah, you're definitely right. Is it important? Was it necessary to release? No, probably not. But I can tell you exactly why the NHL did it, and it was to build as much hype as they can for these upcoming playoffs and getting back to playing. Because as soon as they released, or that was released, people on Twitter started talking about Hotel X and how there's going to be a lot of fights breaking out at the buffet line. So I'm sure that's why they did that. It was because, people like to take that stuff and have some fun with it. And the NHL is looking at how they can get excitement ramped up as we get closer and closer because they know people are itching for hockey to be back.
Like I say, money talks. So anything that they can kind of hype up, including hotels, it kind of is publicity for them. So like they say, any publicity is kind of good publicity. But again, like Mike said too, these things should have been a little bit more private. I mean, what are people going to do? Go over there? I mean, it's going to be shut down. So we also had the rosters announced. I know you're really excited, Jake, about Alexander Bier-Boulette coming and possibly playing for the Lightning, and Cal Foote is also on that roster. Shout out to him too, and how he's been playing. So we'll start with you, Jake.
Let me start by saying this. I don't think these guys are going to end up being able to play at all because these are guys, obviously, that if our players get hurt, they'll step in. Then again, Stamkos is made of glass, so that's a strong possibility. But yeah, I'm excited that they even get this opportunity to have a shot and potentially play. I would love to see them get an opportunity. I've been excited about ABB ever since we signed him because he was so good when he was playing in the minors. He scored so many goals, so many points. He still does. And people have been saying he's been getting a lot better. He's been, he's still scoring a ton of goals and points. And so I would love to see how he can compete at the NHL level. So I'm very excited to see how these are two of our biggest prospects right now that are playing with the Crunch. So I think every Lightning fan would be excited to see how they can hold their own. And this is a good look into the future to see what we may or may not need to do.
I would agree with that. The reason that Foote and ABB are on the roster, you mentioned, Jake, was to really get that practice in because they want to, practice with the big club. I don't see them playing, but it's the same thing that we saw all the hype around Ilya Sorokin, the Islanders goaltender. he won't be able to play in the playoffs, but he gets a opportunity to see what he's made of when it comes to the big club, and he's already signed to a contract next year. So that in and of itself is good for the Islanders, but for the Lightning's sake, I think it's really, really good that they brought up players like Volkov, who struggled this year, ABB, Calfoot. I was a little surprised that they did not add more goaltenders. I know 4 is a lot already, but again, we don't know what's going to happen. And I mentioned this in the piece that I wrote about the roster. Anyways, if Vasilevsky goes down, we're screwed. And I think that's the case for the majority of playoff teams. If your starting goaltender goes down, you're screwed. But if you have tons of options, you might be able to have lightning strike, pardon the pun. And, I'm surprised they didn't allow for more goalies because it was as many goalies as you wanted.
Yeah, and that's a big thing too. Like you mentioned before the show, Mike, we basically traded Connor Ingram away for nothing, a 7th round pick, which, 7th round picks, they rarely turn out anyways. So, having him would have been nice too, but, it kind of is what it is. And then
let's just hope that Vasi doesn't have to go down, so we don't have to worry about that, right?
Yes.
Knock on wood.
Right. And speaking of Andrei Vasilevsky, he did get nominated for the Vezina today. I know we're kind of jumping around at all over the place today, but he did get nominated for the Vezina, and that's really huge for organization, and that speaks towards him and how good of goaltender he is.
Yeah, super happy for Vasi that he got another nomination. This is his 3rd in a row, I believe. So has a chance to win 2 in a row. Whether he deserves it or not is a whole nother conversation. I think a lot of people think Hellebuck is the number 1 guy for this year, but just being nominated, I know, is a big deal for these players, and it's really cool to see us to finally have a goaltender. Well, Bishop was big for us and probably could have stayed if it wasn't for Vasi. But point being, we have not had a very good goalie for a very long time. So it's exciting for Vasi.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say that for Vasi to even have been nominated for the Vezina for a 3rd time, that's unprecedented for the Lightning. I believe the only player that has been nominated twice for the Vezina was Ben Bishop with 2. So really big step towards him becoming the greatest goalie in the Lightning franchise. And for him, he's young and his contract doesn't kick in until next year. So he has an opportunity to even cement himself further into that conversation of greatest Lightning goalie ever.
He needs to win the cup though first. We need to get that one out of the way. But yeah, he definitely has a chance to do that with his competition being Hobby Bullen. The only reason I put Hobby Bullen over Vasi now is because of the Stanley Cup. So, and I guarantee you he wins one soon enough.
And I think that if Vasilevsky does, I think we might be looking at a Hall of Fame career. So that would be really big on us. And let's going back to the bubble. Like I said, I know we're bouncing around, but every team was required to bring a content creator. So I know you guys really like the Doc Talk and Alex Kaloran. Coaches will not be required to wear the mask, and teams will be administrating approximately 1,250 tests per day. That's a lot of tests and a lot of money going into those tests. But, everybody needs to be safe. So that's really big.
Yeah, this is the way of the NHL making sure the bubble is as safe as possible. I've seen a lot of people, we've talked about this on a couple other episodes too, but, a lot of people have been talking about how they don't think the NHL season should continue because it's not safe for the players. But I think the NHL, for the most part, has done a really good job at how they've handled the situation in their plan. But testing these guys every day, all the time, and testing them extra times if they do end up positive, I think is a good move by the NHL. You obviously need this. And I think that for most players, if we can get into the bubble successfully with no positive cases, I think this is actually a much more safer scenario than it would be if they were just, a regular everyday in public kind of deal.
I think the fact also that they're split between 2 cities really helps, with controlling the coronavirus a little bit more. I look to the NBA, and I think the NBA has done a really good job in trying to restart play, but they've got all 30 teams in one area, which is not great because you have just so many players that could possibly contract the virus, whereas in the NHL, players are going to leave once they get eliminated. So it'll be a lot easier for them to go up to Toronto or Edmonton, quarantine, practice, play, and then when they get eliminated, if they do, they go back and they quarantine back at home.
Yeah, that's a big thing too. I talked about that in last episode. I feel like the bubble is going to be a lot safer than just being out on the streets. I mean, you have, like I said before, you're gonna, if you're not on the street, you're gonna be getting a haircut and whatever. You're gonna be exposed to people. Having them in the bubble and having those type of people that do that kind of work with them inside that bubble is going to be huge.
Yeah, and even just everyday tasks like going to the grocery store. Those players are not going to have to go do that. They're going to have food delivered to them. Even if you say, oh, if someone can obviously quarantine and be as safe as they can at home too, yes, but like you have to go to the grocery store at some point to get food, and these guys aren't even going to have to do that. So there's very, very little that can expose them. Now, obviously, if something gets into the bubble, that's a whole nother story and is much more of a bigger problem. But if we can successfully get into that bubble without having any cases, I think going to work well for the NHL. I think they've done a good job at setting up a plan. So, but we'll see. Only time will tell.
They can leave the bubble only in extreme circumstances. So, I mean, if like someone, if their wife is pregnant or whatever, or, something happens to their family, they can leave and that's not a problem. So that's the big thing too. That the players, if they had to, they would like to be able to leave the bubble. But if they do leave the bubble without complying and, without saying, having those extreme circumstances, they can be fined or draft picks be taken away from their teams. I mean, draft picks are big. I know I mentioned earlier about the 7th rounder, but, what if it's a 4th rounder coming from some team? That's a big deal.
Yeah, very big deal. And I like this by the NHL. I think this shows that they want to make this bubble as safe as possible. I've seen a couple of times with the NBA, people were talking about how some people got invited into the bubble and stuff like that. And it seems like it's a lot more flexible. I don't know all the details, but basically this is the NHL saying, like, we will not tolerate anybody doing anything to jeopardize the bubble. Our goal is to keep these people as safe as possible. We want to get back to play and bring our fans some hockey. So, this is their way of making sure that doesn't happen, because obviously players don't want to do that to their teams and teammates because it'll obviously really hurt them. Now, if they do it, I guarantee you some of these guys are going to get traded very quickly. So I doubt any of them are going to do that. So I like this. It's may seem a little harsh, but when you're in a situation like this where safety is on the line, I think it's a good move by the NHL.
A few players have sat out because they can do so without being disciplined, including Mike Green from Edmonton, Hamonic from Calgary, Berchi from Vancouver, and including an assistant coach from Florida, Mike Kitchens. And I know before the show, Mike, you were talking about how big Edmonton would be taking the Green loss. So go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, so when you look at Edmonton's defense, and we'll get into the Western matchups and who we think is going to prevail, spoiler alert, I still think it's Edmonton, but you look at their defense, and their 2 best defenders are Oscar Klefbom and Darnell Nurse. Oscar Klefbom is a really good shot blocker. He's led the league in shots despite spending some time in the IR this year. But in terms of defense, he is decent. And same with Darnell Nurse. He is a decent defender, and he's got a pretty good offensive upside. Mike Green was supposed to bolster their defensive core, and they paid a price that, could be construed as minimal. They paid a 4th-round pick and Kyle Brodziak for Green, but in the grand scheme of things, it was a much larger deal when they also acquired Andreas Athanasiou from the Red Wings in exchange for 2 second-round picks. It's basically one giant deal. So to have one of the 2 pieces that you acquired opt out is not good, especially when it comes from a place that you need defensive depth.
Yeah, and that was a big trade too, getting Athanasiou for Edmonton. Having the speed of him with Connor McDavid. But yeah, Green is going to be a huge loss for them, especially defensively. I mean, they don't have a lot of defensive depth in their team. I know they have players coming up eventually like Bouchard, but right now you don't really have that. So it's going to be a big loss for them. Corey Crawford ruled unfit to practice, and that's going to be big for Chicago if he cannot come in and play, because then you'd have to have Malcolm Subban play. And he did okay for Vegas, but at the same time, I don't know if you want him to be the number one goalie for you going into the play-in round.
Yeah, Corey Crawford is obviously the Blackhawks' go-to guy. He's been with them for so long and been that goalie for them for so long that if he's not able to play during the play-in round, it's going to be a disappointment for them. But I do think Subban has got some potential there too. So I think, the Blackhawks, it wouldn't be a too major of a loss because Crawford, is not how he was a couple years ago. It's still a loss for them, obviously, but we will have to wait and see. I think Subban could be his opportunity to step up and show that he has potential and can work really well with the Blackhawks. And I also want to just add to, I know we all know this and most people are of this mindset, but obviously I have no issues whatsoever with any of these players sitting out or coaches for that matter. I think that it's good for them to sit out if they think in their situation it's too dangerous. I am glad to see that for most players they are ready to come back and excited to come back, so that's a good sign. But obviously just want to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like for instance, I'm not saying he is, but I mean, can you imagine if like someone like Andrei Vasilevsky sat out? That'd be huge for us. So,
but we would lose first round. I have no doubt.
Yeah.
Nah, I think we could pull through.
I have flashbacks from last year. We'll see.
It'd be tough.
And another person that was kind of, he's not ruled unfit to play, but he's having issues right now. I don't think he really stuck up to a workout regimen or anything, because apparently Johnny Gaudreau was kind of heavy. Spittin' Chicklets kind of jokes around and calls him Johnny Ham and Cheese. So maybe he had too many ham and cheese sandwiches. I don't know, but he's practicing with the Black Aces. So, can you imagine if Johnny Gaudreau is not able to come play just because of his weight issues?
Yeah, that'll be a huge deal, obviously, because he's such a big superstar. I haven't seen anything on my end that indicates he's not going to be able to play, but, obviously, especially during this time, people are taking note of everything that's going on right now. So if a player misses practice, people are going to notice it. It was like, I can't remember who it was, but, somebody went to go to the bathroom and people thought he was being traded. That's right, it was Gaudreau. So that's just what we're dealing with right now. This could be something, obviously, and it could not be too. So I don't think there's any huge signs. As long as he's able to get back into the swing of things and start practicing with the team soon enough, I don't think this is anything major. But that'll be huge for the Flames if he's ended up deemed unfit to play or whatever the scenario may be. But we're just gonna have to wait and see here as we get closer and closer to actually playing some games.
So for a couple of years now, I would say for the better part of 6 or 7 years, Johnny Gaudreau has been a major part of trade rumors. I know that at the draft, the year before Ben Bishop was traded, because Vasilevsky was ready, they were talking about switching Gaudreau and Bishop 1-for-1. And I don't know if that would have been a good trade at the time, but, that's how far back speculation has gone, that Johnny Gaudreau would have not been a Calgary Flame anymore. So I think this is the final nail in the coffin. I'm going to be quite honest with you. I don't know where he goes from here unless he has a spectacular playoffs. I think that we're about to see the end of Johnny Gaudreau in a Calgary Flame uniform. I think he's fed up with this.
Yeah, I know you talked about earlier, Jake, about fake trade rumors, and another superstar was involved in one of those, and that would be Brock Besser. It was declared fake, like I said. Having these trade rumors, I mean, I feel like it would affect these players eventually, no?
I think for some of them, yes, but I think also some players who have been in the game a lot longer, like Goodrow, are they get used to this kind of stuff. They know how to filter a lot of this stuff out. I think when you ask a lot of players too about trade rumors, they'll kind of look at you like you're have 100 heads. So these guys know how to filter that stuff out. So and I think it's not true for every player. It obviously, is going to affect you in some way because you can't block out everything. But yeah, Besser was an interesting one because I know a lot of Canucks fans are a big fan of him. He's been really good for that team recently, and a lot of people think he is the future of the Vancouver Canucks. So to see his name up there was very interesting, and it doesn't surprise me though that this seems like it's false and it's not going to happen. So.
I mean, for the Canucks, just think about it. You are a rising, up-and-coming team. As Jake was talking about, you have a superstar in the making in Pedersen. You have JT Miller as a nice complementary piece, and Brock Besser was sort of the catalyst for your rebuild. And I think that if you were to trade him, Jim Benning would get fired, and it would just turn out to be this giant mess because they were really far apart in contract talks last summer. So if they trade him this summer to free up cap space, it looks really, really bad in the organization. So I think at the end of the day, the Canucks are hopefully not going to trade him because he's very, very valuable to the team. And, he's a superstar.
Yeah, he really is. Speaking of superstars, Stamkos is injured again. Can we gives him someone who's lower body and just be healthy? Because I'm sick and tired of him just being injured all the time. And I love the guy, so it sucks. Joe Smith just tweeted out too that he is itching closer, and he thinks he should be able to join teams for drills. You can't say when. It could be tomorrow, could be in a few practices. But oh my gosh, can you believe that if he did not make the playoffs for us?
Don't even speak that into existence. It's like you said, it's a bummer. I would be willing to donate my lower body to him. The poor guy. Seems like he's always getting hurt. I don't know what it is. But the good news with this situation is that it seems like he's going to be fine. He is supposed to be back for a couple of the practices, I think, and he should be back good to go once round robin games start. So I'm not too worried about it just because people, from what I've heard from the officials, is that they're saying he should be fine and good to go. So I don't think there's too much to worry about. He is already practicing. He was out there with the power play unit. So not too worried. But I hope that they make sure he is 110% ready to go so we don't have any issues further down the road. So because we already got one blessing in that, these playoffs got delayed as much as they did so he could come back in the first place. So, it would really stink to see him have to miss a round or two.
Yeah, and when I did my piece for you guys, I actually did it not to sound any alarms, but I did lineups based on Stamkos not being on the ice for the Lightning, and I fully think that he'll be ready. But if he's not, a couple other players are going to have to step up, and the one that I think is going to have to the most is Andre Palat because he's had a fantastic bounce back season, but he's mostly been playing that second line role. And if Stamkos goes down, and Stamkos has been a winger most of the season, Palat's going to have to take that role.
Yeah, and like you said, Palat is a really good player, and he has played a really good year this year. I feel like I think I mentioned this before, and I feel like Palat is a very underrated player. I know Jake is really fond of him as well. So and he's sneaky good. Like nobody talks about him, but like when he has these big moments, like he really shines. And if he steps up in the playoffs, whether Stamkos be in or out, I mean that'd be really big to our team. Going towards the play-in round, I haven't mentioned this yet, but Rogers Place was just flooded, and they have some severe damage. But they said that apparently it wouldn't affect them going into the play-in rounds. So I really hope so. The last thing I want to see is another delay in hockey because no offense, but I'm sick and tired of being home and with nothing to watch on TV.
Yeah, well, thankfully this doesn't seem to be too bad. Now, then again, the only video I've seen of the damage was on Twitter, and it looked like it was shot on a potato, and a statement from the team. But from what I can tell, it doesn't look too bad, which is good to hear. However, only time will tell here. And the good news is too, it seems like the damage is kind of in the entrance areas. I don't know this, but it seems like, even if they do have to do some construction that'll take a while, they could still potentially play games since there's no fans coming in, obviously. So now if this happened during, regular playoff times, this could be a huge deal because then, it affects the fans, which changes a lot of the scenario. But it does look like it's not too bad, and they did say that this shouldn't affect them as a hub city, so hopefully it stays that way and they can get it fixed pretty quickly.
Yeah, the last thing I want to do is having to change another hub city. Like I said, last episode we were really waiting on hub city watch, and I don't want to really do that again. But let's go into the Western previews first. We talked about how we think that the Oilers and the Hawks are going to kind of match up. Let's start there, starting with you, Jake.
Yeah, this will be a fun series. I think there's a lot of fun series that are going to be going on for this qualifying round, so I'm excited. I think Edmonton is, on paper the better team here, obviously with guys like Connor McDavid. They definitely have that superstar power. And with the Blackhawks question marks, like we talked about with the goaltending, we don't know how that's going to pan out for them. So I think Edmonton is definitely the stronger team here, and they would be my pick for this. I don't think many of these games are going to go 3 games, but if I had to pick one that could be a potential sweep, this is the one I look at. But we'll have to wait and see.
I think I would agree with what you said, besides the fact that it might be a sweep, because if there's one thing the Hawks do really, really well, it is put the puck in the net. And I know that is going to be a more difficult thing, possibly with all the rust from the players. But when you've got players like Kirby Dach and Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, Brendan Saad, even Alex DeBrincat, who can really score goals, I think that might cause a little bit of trouble for Edmonton. Now, I'm not saying that Edmonton is going to lose the series. I think McDavid and Draisaitl are going to eat the Chicago defenders alive, because Chicago's defense is statistically the worst in the league, or it was last year. That's right, even worse than Buffalo, even worse than Ottawa, even worse than Detroit. It was the worst in the league last year. So if they don't have Corey Crawford, yeah, it might be a sweep. But if they do, I think it could go to 4 games.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify too. I'm right there with you. I think Chicago can very easily win 1 game, and that's what it's going to be for a lot of these series. But if I had to pick one that was most likely to be a sweep, I think this would be my pick. Potentially.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. I feel like Chicago might win this one.
Okay.
Because, Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane, they have the playoff experience, especially if Corey Crawford's ready to go. I feel like they'll actually do really well in the playoffs. They haven't been in there quite some time now. But the fact that they were almost ruled a dynasty, a few years back, that's a really good team even now. I mean, we talked about DeBrincat being on the team now. He wasn't on the team back then, and so the additions of those players coming in finally towards the playoff game, I feel like Chicago might win this one.
That's a fair point about veteran experience. They definitely have a lot of it and know how to get things done in important games. So I think they could play a factor, but I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I think a lot of this series hangs too in what the goaltending situation ends up being. Also, can we talk about the crazy scenario where Edmonton ends up losing and ends up with another first overall pick? Because that would be quite funny.
Or Chicago ends up losing and ends up bolstering their already powerful offense with Alexis Lafreniere.
That's another good point.
Yeah. I think they said, 20% chance of these teams getting Alexis Lafreniere, 12.5. Any of these teams could get Alexis Lafreniere, and that either Chicago or Edmonton, they get him. I mean, they get another franchise player. on their team. So that'd be huge for them. So I'm gonna go back to the top here of this thing, and Calgary and Winnipeg. We'll start with you again, Jake. Who do you think is going to take this one?
This is going to be a good series. These are two good teams that have been at the top of their games recently. If I have to pick one off the top of my head, I think I'm going with Winnipeg on this one. I think Winnipeg with Hellebuck is just a very good team. I think Hellebuck can push them over the top. When you look at a tightly contested matchup, goaltenders are usually the ones that can end up being the difference makers in these games. And, I think the Winnipeg has the goaltending advantage in this one. So I'm going with Winnipeg on this one. I think this is one that could very easily go to 5 games and be back and forth, and either team could win. But it'll be interesting to see for sure. Also, obviously, with Goodrow, if he ends up playing. So, that's another big factor there. I think he will. But I'm taking Winnipeg in 5 in this one.
I want to say Calgary only because their defense is so much better than Winnipeg's. Like, Winnipeg's defense is basically made up of a couple of teenagers and a bunch of tissue paper. But then again, I look and Connor Hellebuck is far superior than David Riddick. So this is tough because their offenses are very similar. They both have players that can dish out the puck and put the puck in the net. And if we get the same playoff Patrick Laine that we did last year, I think Winnipeg wins this series pretty handily. So I'll go with Winnipeg in 4.
I'm going to say Calgary, guys. I'm sorry going against you guys, but I'm going to say Calgary because I feel like the play of Matthew Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau and Sean Monahan, I feel like they're going to rip apart Winnipeg's defense, like you mentioned. I know they have Connor Hellebuck in the back end, but they're such good players, and I mean, even if they're together or separate, they can drive a line just by themselves. I know I said Edmonton's going to lose, but I mean, it's similar to those type of players on Calgary as well. So I feel like I'm going to take Calgary in this one. I'll say a sweep in this one.
Wow.
That's big. I like that.
Wow. He's going bold.
I'm here for it, though.
So we're going to go to the next one here, and that's going to be Vancouver and Minnesota. Jake, since we begin with you, we'll start with Mike here.
So Vancouver, Minnesota is a really interesting matchup as well because Minnesota wasn't very good until the end of the season when they replaced Dubnyk with Stalock in net, and they went on a run mostly due to the fact that Kevin Fiala became a superstar during the second half of the season. So I think I'm still going to have to go with Vancouver here because I know that a lot of people have experience on Minnesota. Like Ryan Sutter, Zach Parise, a couple other of the players have had playoff experience, less so on the Vancouver side. But Jakob Markstrom was really good in that. He maybe should have been a contender for the Vezina Trophy. They've got a decent shutdown back end plus Quinn Hughes, and their offense is not great in terms of depth, but their top 6 is really good. So I'll go with Vancouver in 4 because I think Fiala and Stalock will win 1 game.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it. This is another tough one. All these games are, I think, going to be pretty tightly contested games. I think a lot of this comes down to goaltending too, and we don't know. I believe Dubnyk is going to be the starter for the Wild. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that can play a huge factor here because I think if Dubnyk starts for the Wild, I'm going to give the edge to Vancouver. I think Vancouver is going to be my pick here. I'll say, I want to say in 4, but this one could easily go to 5. It wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. But when you look at Vancouver, I just think they have a lot of superstar talent up front. Guys like JT Miller, Brock Besser, like we talked about, are really good offensive guys. And I think going against Dubnyk, who has had a down year this year, they're going to be able to beat him. Now, if they end up taking Dubnyk out, because I think he's going to have a short leash, and then we get, a complete flip, and Minnesota goes on a run, they could very easily win this in 5. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how the goaltending situation plays out for the Wild. But for my pick, I'm taking Vancouver in 4.
This is the first time I'm going to agree with you guys. I'm going to say Vancouver. I talked about Chicago's experience in the playoffs, and a lot of the players in Minnesota have that experience as well. But I feel like the emergence of Quinn Hughes, plus players like Bo Horvat and Jacob Markstrom and Elias Pettersson, and like we talked about earlier, Brock Besser, and of course we got JT Miller on that team too. So I feel like Vancouver is going to take this one. The next one is going to be the Predators and the Yotes. Jake, I know you said you were pretty excited about this one, so we'll start with you, buddy.
I am excited. That's because I think the Coyotes are a fun team, and I think they have a nice shot this year at possibly making the playoffs. The Coyotes are still a very young team, but they're up and coming here, and I think they got a good shot at this. And I'm going to take the Coyotes in this series. They're definitely the underdogs in this one, but when I look at it, Arizona's been playing, better and better over these last couple of years, and I think that the Predators have been doing the opposite. If you look at their last couple of playoff runs, when they won the Cup back a few years ago, they ended up losing then, I believe, in the second round, and they lost in the first round. So they have not been able to reproduce what they could a couple years ago. Now, if they can get back to that, obviously, I think this will be an easy series for them. But the way I look at it now, I don't, it's hard for me to sit here and say that the Predators are going to be able to do that. And I think that the Coyotes are going to be a hungry team. They've got a team that's got nothing to lose here. So I think they're going to have a fire under them. I think they win this in 5.
I've been thinking about this. I am going to go with Arizona in a sweep because we talked about before the show how the goaltending core of Arizona is much better than the goaltending core of Nashville this season. And Pecorine is a hot and cold goaltender, and he was very, very good last year, and he was very good the year before, and he has been very bad this year. And maybe the time off could help him, but with such a defensive structure that Arizona has, where it allows the goalies to be just superhuman, I think they can score enough to win in a sweep, which will be surprising to a lot of fans. But if you've seen Darcy Kemp over the last 2 years, it shouldn't be that surprising.
Yeah, and I'm going to tag along with you guys on this one. I'm going to say the Yotes are going to win this one. As Biz says on Spittin' Chicklets, they're a wagon. So I feel like they're going to ride it all the way on this one. And I know it's kind of a dark horse, I guess you could say. But I feel like the Yotes are going to be way better than the Predators. This might be a little biased, too, because I'm not a big fan of the Predators either. But, with Ranta and, players like Taylor Hall and Phil Kessel. I know Phil Kessel hasn't really worked for them. But, I mean, he is a multi-time Stanley Cup champion. So with him on that team, I feel like they're going to beat the Preds. And I kind of agree with you too, Mike. And I feel like this might be another sweep.
Wow. I thought I was going to be the only one. I'm glad to see somebody else is on board.
Well, I just want to talk about the round robin games real quick because I think the scheduling of some of this is interesting as well. We know that the qualifying round is going to go to the 9th guaranteed because we have round robin games taking place on the 9th, which I think is something interesting the NHL did is they basically set up these round robin games to where they're guaranteeing fans, even if all of these series end in a sweep, there is still going to be hockey through the 9th, which I think is kind of cool. What is interesting for teams like the Stars, the Lightning also have this scenario, but we're not talking about the East right now, who are playing on the 3rd and the 5th and then do not play again until the 9th. So that gives them 3 days off between those games. So, a team like, for example, the Lightning, who are very struggle with rust all the time, this could be a big deal. So I think it's interesting to see. I don't know how competitive these games are going to be because while it is for seeding, home ice is obviously not as big of a deal as it normally would be. So, I don't know how much competitive they're going to have, but, I think these are going to be fun games to watch and good filler games too.
I don't know about you guys, but I am really, really looking forward to Colorado versus Vegas. And I want to see that as the Western Conference final matchup. And I think we might see it as a play-in little teaser, but I really want to see them in a 7-game series duke it out for the right to go to the Stanley Cup final because far and away, I know St. Louis is the number 1 overall team in the West. I think Colorado and Vegas are the number 1 and 2 teams in the West right now. So I just think their playing styles are very similar. They have a bunch of superstars. Nate McKinnon is my favorite non-Bolt. So I think it'll be a really interesting series. If I had to choose one of these teams to win the number 1 seed, I would probably go with Vegas.
Yeah. I was there when they selected the team at the awards a few years back, and I've kind of followed them ever since. So it would really make me happy if Vegas beat Colorado. I'm not saying I'm against Colorado, but, having that favoritism there is big for me. And they do have, shut down players like Mark Stone on that team. So I'm not saying that Mark Stone is as good as McKinnon, but I feel like it's kind of comparing apples to oranges. One's offensive, one's defensive. So I feel like that would be a really good matchup. And then, you have St. Louis against Dallas, and that's what kind of Jake talked about earlier. And, I mean, my favoritism is going to play into the effect here, too, because I really like Ben Bishop. So I hope that Dallas beats St. Louis as well.
Who's your pick, Phil, to win the number 1 seed in the round robin tournaments?
I'll go with Vegas.
Vegas.
Yeah.
This is gonna be close. I think we got a lot of fun. I keep saying that, but a lot of these matches are gonna be a lot of fun. But I'm gonna go with the Stars just because I think I'm a little biased here, but I think Ben Bishop is gonna have a good round robin tournament, and I think he has the ability to push the Stars to the next level. They've been, on the edge of being one of the top teams, so I think they could be the surprise team. If anybody, I think you're right, Mike. I think that Vegas and Colorado are probably the most likely top 2 picks. The Blues too. The Blues are a decent team, but I think the Stars are the underdog here that could slip in and potentially take the number 1 seed.
And Mike already said his pick, and he said Vegas with me as well. So I feel like these going to be, like you said, Jake, they're going to be really fun matchups. But, it really is. Hockey is going to be back, and we're all excited for that. And I know you guys are as well. So it's going to be great when it comes back. I can't
and
really
real
think
quick, Phil, I don't mean to interrupt you. I want to mention, too, something to note with these playing round games is that all of these games have a 1-day break except for one game which has a back-to-back. So for example, if you look at the Coyotes Predators game, they play on the 2nd, then the 4th, and then on the 5th. But so every team has a potential back-to-back if it goes the full 5 games, and then every other game is 1 day off.
Yeah, and that's going to be big too, and have those days off in between games. But like you said, it's kind of an interesting schedule. One other thing that came out too are the finalists for the Jack Adams and the Calder Trophy. We'll get into predictions closer towards the awards, but I really like the fact that John Tortorella has been nominated here because of what he has gone through as far as his team. I mean, basically half his offensive team left him, and of course you got Sergei Bobrovsky going to Florida as well. And the other 2 coaches were Bruce Cassidy and Alain Vigneault. Cassidy coached the Bruins, and Vigneault coached the Flyers. What do you guys have to say about this?
It makes me really angry, sort of, that Tortorella is such a good coach considering what happened last year. But, I mean, he really, really found a way to take that team and bring them really close to a playoff spot before the season stopped. And now they're officially technically in the playoffs. But I think he'll win. I don't think it's going to be much of a competition between him, Vigneault, and Cassidy. If there was another coach that I would have liked to see be a nominee, it would have been Mike Sullivan, because the Penguins had been through so many injuries and they just kept on chugging along. And it was just injury after injury to big names like Malkin, Crosby, Gensel, Letang, all those other players and more have been injured, and you've got all these no-name players just scoring goals and putting up points and playing good defense for the Penguins. But as far as those three candidates, I think that Tortorella is going to win it pretty easily.
Jake?
Yeah, I'm not, I'm not big on this award, and what I mean by that is I don't pay too much attention to all the coaches, but I think Tortorella has obviously been one of those, known top tier coaches for a long time. Obviously, he was with us and got us our first Stanley Cup. I'm not the biggest Tortorella fan. I think that sometimes he can be a little out of hand, but that is his style too, which can be very entertaining sometimes, for sure. So I don't know. All these guys are great coaches. I think there's a lot of potential with all of them, and as much as these awards are not supposed to be based on the playoffs, I think it'll be interesting to see how these teams perform in the playoffs, because I think this is a time where coaches can make a real difference for teams that are going up against tough matchups.
Yeah, it really is. Like you said, the coaches are what drives the team. So I mean, if the coaches aren't up to par, they're not going to be up to par either. So that's going to be huge. And then, like I said too, the Calder Memorial Trophy finalists were announced too, and that's going to be Hughes, Makar, and Kubalik. Hughes obviously played for the Canucks. Makar played for the Avalanche, and Kubalik played for the Blackhawks. The only thing that I'm kind of I don't really know how to say this, but I feel like Merzlikins should have been on this list. But I feel like also that goalies don't get the love that they should.
Yeah, that's true. I really, really liked Merzlikins. He was, with Tortorella, one of the reasons that Columbus was even able to make it that far along during the season. And, when Korpisalo went down originally, they thought that, and a lot of people thought that, a depleted Columbus team would have no shot, and Merzlikins comes in and he dominates basically. I would give my vote to Cale Makar because he is something I don't think we've seen in a very long time. He is, and this is a very big comparison, so I hope I don't regret saying this, but he reminds me a lot of Paul Coffey, at least the highlights that I watched, because I was not old enough to watch Paul Coffey when he played. But just his style, the way that he skates, the way that he can shoot the puck, his vision. Cale Makar is a superstar. And I think that in any other year, Quinn Hughes would have won. But Cale Makar is awesome.
Yeah, Cale Makar really is awesome. Jake, who do you think might win this Calder?
I don't know. It's a tough call. I think that all these players are very big and important pieces to their team. I think for Hughes, I think he's going to get overshadowed a little bit just because there's so much more superstar talent, if you will, I shouldn't say superstar talent, but just more overall talent on the Canucks. But if I had to pick a guy, I think you look at a guy like, forgive me, how do you say his name on the Avalanche? Makar, 50 points, 57 games. That's obviously very, very impressive. He's, that's almost to a point where it's a point per game, which is really good. And even though he's got some good players on that team, the Avalanche are one of those teams that can easily be one of the top contenders for the Stanley Cup this year. So for me, I'd look at a guy like him who has made a large impact on a team that is still very good. So,
yeah, I'm going to go with Makar as well here. I mean, he has 50 points in 57 games. And like you said, Mike, a comparison to Paul Coffey, yeah, it's a big shoe to fill. But at the same time, if he continues this way, I feel like he's going to be a lot like Paul Coffey. Like you said, too, Jake, I know kind of on a a mistake there. But Francouz is another goalie that played really well. He's a rookie and he didn't start many games, but the games that he played in and started, he did really well in. So I like, again, I feel like these goalies are getting overshadowed, and I don't feel like they're getting the love that they deserve. But it is what it is. Just like there's only one, there's two goaltending awards, the Jennings and the Vezina. But if you look at that compared to the ones that the forwards and defensemen have, they have so many more that they could possibly win.
Yeah, and I think there is a chance where, goaltenders and the love of goaltenders gets a little too far. Like, I know I talked about how Darcy Kemper probably would have won the Hart Trophy if he stayed healthy. That might have been a bit of an overshoot, but you think about how valuable goaltenders are to their teams. You look at a team like the Lightning a couple of years ago, they lost Steven Stamkos before the playoffs started. They lost Anton Stroman before the playoffs started. Two extremely talented, necessary individuals. They made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. As soon as they lost Ben Bishop and Andre Vasilevsky did what he could, the Penguins destroyed them. And Vasilevsky was a beast in net, and he got them to 7 games, and he played like a really, really motivated cat in Game 7. But there's only so much the goaltender can do. So I really think that the fact that we only have two trophies for the goaltender, and one of them is a points trophy where, like, if you give up the least amount of goals in the season, you technically win the trophy. I don't necessarily like that. So I think it would be nicer to see them get nominations in the Calder and the Hart and all these other opportunities for them.
So I'm going to wrap it up here with the questions that we received. The first one is going to be from D. Keems. He says, how do you think early games will affect the players? How likely will playoff format follow the same timelines? So we'll go with you, Jake. And how do you think that they're going to be affected by the early starts?
I don't think the early starts will be too much of a big deal. These players have gone through games that are early starts sometimes. It's this is not something that's completely out of the ordinary for them. So it could have a slight effect on some guys, but I really honestly don't see there being too much of a jump there because this is something that they have done before. They have played early games, so.
I would say something similar because, the Bolts really struggled for a season. I think it was one of their narratives. They struggled during early games, like 1 o'clock start times or 4 o'clock start times. But I don't think it'll be that much of a difference this time around because I think players are just excited to get into the swing of things.
Yeah, and I agree with. I'm going to tag along with you guys, and I'm going to agree that I don't think that it's going to have too much effect. They do play early games here and there. Sometimes they have a 10 o'clock start on a Sunday, so I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. However, I feel like coming back to the hockey in general is going to be a big deal because considering how long they've not played. So I don't think there's going to be too much effect on the schedule as much it is going to be just returning to play. And then the final question here we have by David Morales, and he says, how have other league success or failure with a bubble make you feel about an NHL bubble? What do you guys have to say?
This is a very interesting question and a good question, I think. We haven't seen too much of bubble effects quite yet because they're all just getting kicked up. But when you look at a bubble like the NBA, I think that I feel a bit better about the NHL's one just because it seems like the NBA's one is much more flexible, much more open, if you will. Something that does worry me is that somebody being invited into the bubble like we saw. I don't know if this ever actually ended up happening, but there were rumors that people were getting invited into the NBA bubble. That's something that could potentially shut down the NHL season just like that. So that's something that I hope doesn't happen with the NHLs, but I think the NHL is more prepared for that scenario. But when you look at the NBA bubble, that's something I see that I think needs to be looked at and taken care of. And then as for other, I don't know too many other sports bubbles in detail. I know soccer has had a couple of places that are doing their bubble. For me, the big thing is, are these sports able to get into the bubble successfully without having any positive cases? Because if they can do that, I think all of these bubbles, no matter how they're set up specifically, can be successful. So, that's the big thing for me is how are they getting these teams into the bubble? And for the NHL, they're doing a lot of testing and making sure that players are constantly being tested before they go into these bubbles so that if they do end up with a positive case, they can remove them from that scenario. So, to answer the question, I think that other sports have shown that it can be successful. I think the NHL has an even better plan, so I feel okay about it.
Yeah, I think the NHL has done a really good job for their plan. I think that they have outlined it not necessarily to the public, but at least in private circles, it sounds like they've done a really good job of making sure that the players know what they're doing. The players had an opportunity to say, maybe not this year. And now we're just going to continue on. And I think that we will see what it's like when they end up going up to Toronto and Edmonton. I know the only other bubble situation we can see right now is the NBA, and a lot of the NBA's, not necessarily stars, but a lot of their bigger name players are very upset with the quality, which is a whole nother debate in itself of the quality that they're getting in their Disney style hotels. But for the NHL, I haven't heard any complaints about the situation. It sounds like the hotels they're staying at are nice places, and the stadiums, they chose two of the best possible stadiums in the NHL. So hats off to the NHL for actually creating a safe environment with their bubbles, and hopefully they get to a situation where the bubbles are enough to reduce the amount of coronavirus cases.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I don't really know that much about the other bubbles. I don't really watch basketball. The only two sports I really watch are hockey and football. But I'm really happy with what the NHL has done. I feel like they're going to be really safe about everything, and that's kind of the biggest concern right now is everybody's safety. I don't want other players being infected or infecting other players. So I feel like the NHL did a really good job here with setting up their bubble. And the final thing that we're going to mention up here, I didn't mention this earlier, is the Lightning have signed a left-handed defenseman named Sean Day. He's 22 years old, 6'3", 231 pounds. He had exceptional status in juniors where he played for the Minnesota Steelheads, and he's a former third-round pick from the New York Rangers. I know you're pretty excited about this, Jake, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, I like this signing. It's a good depth signing. The Bolts have been very good at picking up a lot of depth guys. They've done this a couple of times. I think our depth prospects, when you look at them as a whole, are very good. This guy's 6'3", which is huge, 220 pounds. Not too many goals and points at the end of the day, but he hasn't played too many games either. But a big guy like this is always nice to have on the blue line. So I know that he was one of a very highly regarded prospects recently, and even though he hasn't kind of fallen off a little bit, I think in our development team or system, I should say, I think he's got a great chance to start to build himself back up again and potentially work his way up into the NHL lineup. So it'll be fun to keep an eye on him and see how he does. But I like this. This is a great depth signing.
Yeah, I think it's an awesome signing as well. From what I've heard, he used to play with Mikhail Sergachev when he was on Windsor in the OHL. So Apparently, he did play in Windsor. I know, Phil, you said Mississauga. I'll look that up real quick. But he was a really, really talented player before, I guess, the bottom just dropped out. Oh, he played for both Mississauga and Windsor. So he had apparently some weight issues. He didn't have the motivation. I think this fact that he got cut by the Rangers is a big deal for him. I hope he brings his A game for the Lightning. He's another member of the New York Lightning, or the Tampa Bay Rangers, as it's more commonly becoming known as, because of all the changes between Lightning and Rangers players. And he will be great depth because Kyle Foote and Dominic Machine are probably going to find their way to the Major League roster next year. So they're going to need Day to step up.
Yeah, like you said, I would really just don't hope we have another Jake Dotchin on our hands with having the weight issues. But I feel like if he plays well, at least we get some depth in Syracuse with probably Cal Foote and Dominic Machine coming up. And that's a big issue right now. The Lightning are going to be strapped for cap. The cap's not going up, and we have two really big names coming up in this upcoming free agency here that need contracts, and that would be Sergachev and Anthony Cirelli. And I know for a fact that both of them are going to, kind of demand for a lot because they're worth it. Cirelli is a really good two-way guy, and Sergachev is really good at two-way as well. So I feel like it's going to be really important for adding people like Sean Day here. And I believe that's all we have to talk about this week. I know it was a lengthy episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Is there anything else you guys would like to add?
Nope, I'm good.
I am good as well.
All right, guys. So I hope you have a good week. We will see you guys next week, and we'll break down the East as far as the matchups. And have a good week, guys. Take care.